My name is Grace Bennett, and for most of my life, people looked at me and saw only what they wanted to see: a maid, a servant, a shadow moving silently through grand hallways. But I learned long ago that silence is a kind of power. When you're quiet, people forget you're there. And when they forget, they speak freely. The Whitmore estate was like something out of a painting. A vast countryside manor with white stone walls and sprawling gardens that glowed golden in the morning sun. Every room smelled faintly of roses and polished wood, and the windows were so tall they made you feel small just standing beside them. When I first arrived, Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore greeted me with a smile that never touched her eyes. She was the kind of woman who turned every glance into a judgment. Her voice was silk over steel. "I expect perfection, Grace," she said that first morning. "You'll find that my standards are higher than most." I nodded and said what I always said. "Yes, ma'am." Her husband, Mr. Charles Whitmore, was different. Kind eyes, calm manner, too distracted by business to notice much else. He thanked me when I poured his tea, something his wife never did. He seemed grateful for peace, though peace was rare in that house. Eleanor's beauty was the kind that drew attention at every party: tall, blonde, always in ivory or champagne-colored silk. But beneath it was a bitterness, sharp and unyielding. She didn't like the way I moved quietly, or how I seemed to notice things she didn't. She would find fault in anything. "The silverware is crooked, Grace. The curtains are dull, Grace. Don't look at me when I'm speaking, Grace." Each word was meant to remind me of where I stood, beneath her heels. But I never answered back, not once, because I understood something Eleanor never would. When a person believes you are beneath them, they never see how close you really are. Days turned into weeks, and I learned the rhythm of that house: her breakfast tray at precisely 8, her perfume lined neatly on the vanity, her phone calls behind the half-closed door of the study. She was careful, always whispering, but not careful enough. One evening, while dusting the stair rail near the landing, I heard her voice, low and tense. "Yes, I've already transferred the first half," she said. "Charles won't notice until it's too late. The rest will be moved next week. We'll be gone by the time he even checks." I froze. She was standing in the study, back to the door, phone pressed to her ear. My heart beat hard against my ribs. She was stealing from him, her own husband. I took one silent step backward and left before she saw me. That night I couldn't sleep. The sound of her voice replayed in my mind like a storm, calm, cold, sure of herself. I thought of Mr. Whitmore, sitting alone in his library, trusting a woman who was plotting to destroy him. By morning, I'd convinced myself I must have misunderstood. Maybe it wasn't what it sounded like. Maybe it was business. But as the days passed, the truth became harder to ignore. I saw her signing papers she quickly hid when I entered. I saw her tear up a letter with his name at the bottom. And one afternoon, when she thought she was alone, she laughed on the phone, a cruel, sharp laugh, and said, "He's so naive, he deserves to lose it all." I knew then that it was no mistake. She planned to drain her husband's accounts and leave him behind. Still, I said nothing. It wasn't my place. I was just the maid. But fate has a way of turning silence into something sharp. 2 weeks later, the accusation came. "Grace," she said one morning, her voice calm in a way that made my stomach twist. "My pearl bracelet is missing, the one from my anniversary. You were cleaning in here yesterday, weren't you?" I felt my blood run cold. "Yes, ma'am, but I didn't." "Then who else could it be?" she snapped, eyes narrowing. "Don't lie to me." I stood still. My throat felt tight, my hands trembling. "Mrs. Whitmore, I haven't taken anything." She smiled then, slow, satisfied. "We'll see about that." By evening, she'd told Mr. Whitmore I was a thief. She stood beside him like a queen delivering a verdict, her voice steady and full of false sorrow. It breaks my heart, Charles, but she's been stealing from us. I've noticed little things missing for months. I wanted to speak, to defend myself, but one look at her told me this was her victory. She wanted me gone. Mr. Whitmore's voice was quiet. Grace, I don't want to believe this, but perhaps it's best if you take a few days away while we sort this out. I nodded. What else could I do? I packed my things that night, a few dresses, a Bible, and the small savings I'd managed to keep hidden away. As I closed the door behind me, Alina watched from the upstairs window, her silhouette glowing against the light. She thought she'd won. But she had forgotten something. I knew her secret, and unlike her, I was patient. The wind that night was soft and cold as I walked down the long gravel road that led away from the Whitmore estate. I didn't cry. I'd learned long ago that tears solved nothing. But inside, something had changed, something quiet and steady, like the sound of a clock ticking toward its final moment. I found a small room to rent above a bakery in the nearby village. The woman who owned it, Mrs. Langley, didn't ask many questions. She saw the uniform folded in my bag and seemed to understand. Hard people up there, she said softly. You keep your head high, love. For the first time in weeks, someone had spoken to me with kindness. It almost made me break. Days passed and I tried to move on, but news of the Whitmores drifted through the village like smoke. Alina was planning a charity gala, her annual show of generosity, as the local paper called it. The estate would be open to the region's wealthiest families, with champagne, live music, and flashing cameras. I could picture her perfectly, standing under the chandeliers, smiling that cold smile, pretending to be something pure. I told myself I didn't care, that it wasn't my problem anymore. But then, one morning, while buying bread, I overheard two men talking outside the shop. Did you hear? One said. Old Whitmore's company's in trouble. Someone been moving money from the accounts. He's no idea who. I froze. It had begun. Alina was making her move. That night I sat by the small window in my room, staring at the moonlit fields beyond. My hands trembled slightly as I remembered her voice, her laughter, the way she'd looked at me when she accused me of stealing. I could still hear her words. We'll see about that. Well, now she would. I opened the small pouch I'd carried since the day I left, the one she never thought to search. Inside were the two things she hadn't realized she'd left behind on her writing desk that day: a torn scrap of her checkbook and a folded receipt from a private account in Switzerland. Both bore her name and signature. Evidence. It wasn't much, but it was enough to point to something bigger. Enough to make Charles Whitmore ask questions. Enough to make him see her for who she truly was. I spent the next week gathering what I could. I walked to the village library every morning, using the public computer to research the bank listed on her papers. I learned that the account was linked to several transfers from Whitmore Holdings, small sums, spread across months, invisible to anyone not looking closely. She was clever, but not clever enough. Each discovery felt like a breath of air after being underwater too long. I wasn't angry anymore, I was focused. Calm. My revenge wasn't going to be fire and shouting. It would be quiet, precise, like stitching a wound shut. When I had everything I needed, I wrote a letter. Not to Alina, but to her husband. It was simple, respectful. I told him I'd found documents that might concern him, that I wasn't seeking forgiveness or payment, only truth. I included copies of what I'd discovered, along with the dates of her calls and the name of the man she'd been whispering to, Richard Ellsworth, one of his business partners. I signed it only. Grace Bennett. 3 days passed. Then, one afternoon, a black car stopped outside the bakery. A man in a gray coat stepped out, holding an envelope. From Mr. Whitmore, he said quietly. He asked me to deliver this personally. Inside was a short note. Grace, thank you for your honesty. I understand now. Please come to the estate this Saturday. CW. I stared at it for a long time. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from the weight of what was coming. Saturday arrived bright and clear. The countryside shimmered under the sun, the air heavy with the scent of summer roses. The Whitmore estate stood just as I'd left it, grand and immaculate, as if nothing had changed. But inside, I knew something had. As I walked up the long stone steps, I heard the faint echo of laughter and music. The gala had begun. Guests in glittering gowns and black suits filled the front garden, their voices mingling with the sound of violins. No one noticed me slip in through the side corridor. The servants still working there recognized me. One even whispered, "Grace, you're back!" But I only smiled faintly and kept walking. Mr. Whitmore found me near the back terrace. He looked different, older, tired, eyes shadowed. But when he saw me, something like relief passed over his face. "Grace," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology." "You owe me nothing, sir," I replied. "Only fairness." He nodded. "You'll have it." He told me he'd reviewed everything. The transfers, the hidden account, the affair. He'd confronted Alina 2 nights before, but she denied it all. Tonight, he planned to end the charade publicly at the gala. I hesitated. "Are you sure that's wise?" His expression hardened. "She built her reputation on lies. Let her watch it fall." I understood that tone. I'd felt it myself. As the evening deepened, the ballroom glowed with golden light. Chandeliers shimmered, music swelled, and the scent of champagne filled the air. Alina stood at the center of it all, radiant in silver silk, greeting her guests as though she were untouchable. She didn't see me at first, but when her eyes finally caught mine across the room, she froze. For a moment, her perfect smile faltered. Then she turned away, pretending not to notice. But it was too late. Mr. Whitmore stepped forward to make his toast. The music softened, the crowd turned. His voice carried steady and calm through the hall. "My friends," he began, "tonight is not only a celebration of generosity, but also of truth. Because without truth, even the grandest homes fall to ruin." Alina's eyes flickered. "Charles, what are you?" He held up a hand. "Please, my dear, let me finish." And then he spoke, gently, elegantly, but with precision sharper than any knife. He thanked his wife for her years of partnership, her charm, her grace, and then revealed, one by one, the financial deceptions she'd hidden. The transfers, the secret accounts, the man named Richard Ellsworth. A gasp rippled through the guests. Cameras clicked. Alina's face drained of color. "I couldn't have discovered any of this," he said, "without the quiet honesty of someone most of you never noticed. Grace Bennett." Every head turned toward me. I stood still at the edge of the room, half in shadow, half in light. Alina's lips parted, shock, fury, humiliation all tangled in her expression. And for the first time, she couldn't find a single word to say. For a moment, the ballroom was utterly still. You could almost hear the chandeliers hum with the weight of silence. Then, whispers began to ripple through the guests, quiet, sharp, like the rustle of silk. Alina stood frozen near the grand piano, eyes darting between the crowd and her husband, searching for an escape that wasn't there. "Charles," she breathed, voice trembling, "you're humiliating yourself." "No," he interrupted softly. "You did that for both of us." Her face twisted, anger, fear, disbelief. But the guests were already turning away from her. The people who had once admired her charm now looked at her as if she were a stranger. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I just stood there, watching quietly as the woman who had looked down on me finally saw what it felt like to be small. Charles didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout. His composure was the sharpest blade of all. "Security will escort you upstairs," he said at last. "You'll find your things packed. My lawyers will be in touch." Her heels clicked sharply as she turned, trying to maintain dignity that had already shattered. As she passed me, our eyes met just for a second. I expected rage, maybe tears, but what I saw was something else entirely. Recognition. She finally realized that the quiet maid she, once humiliated, was the reason her perfect world was crumbling. She didn't say a word. She just walked past me and out of the ballroom, her perfume lingering behind like a ghost. After the guests left and the music faded, I found myself standing alone near the window. The night outside was clear and soft, moonlight washing over the fields beyond the estate. Everything looked almost peaceful, as if nothing had happened. But something had. Mr. Whitmore joined me a few minutes later. His jacket was gone, his face lined with exhaustion. Yet there was something calmer in his expression, a quiet acceptance. "I should have seen it sooner," he said, almost to himself. "You were right, Grace, I was blind." "You trusted her," I replied gently. "That's not blindness, that's love." He nodded, eyes glancing toward the garden. "And you didn't have to get involved. You could have walked away and left me in the dark." I hesitated. I almost did. Then softly, "But some truths don't let you sleep at night." He looked at me for a long moment, then smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carries both gratitude and sadness. "You've given me something I can't repay." "I didn't do it for payment, sir." "I know." He reached into his pocket and handed me a small envelope. "But take this anyway, a small gesture from a man who owes you his peace." Inside was a folded document, a deed. "For you," he said. "A cottage near the river, I think you'll like it there. Quiet, private, and yours." I stared at it, stunned. "Mr. Whitmore, He raised a hand. "No, it's the least I can do." For a long moment, I didn't know what to say. In that silence, something unspoken passed between us, respect. The kind of respect that had never existed before. I left the estate the next morning. The sun was rising, painting the fields gold, the air cool and clean after a night of storm. The house looked smaller somehow, its grand windows empty. As I walked away, I didn't look back. Days turned into weeks. Life in the village returned to its quiet rhythm. I moved into the little riverside cottage, a white stone home surrounded by wildflowers and the sound of water against the banks. I grew herbs in the garden, baked bread in the mornings, and finally learned what peace felt like. Sometimes I'd hear bits of gossip drifting through town about how a leaner had fled abroad, about the scandal that had ended her social circle. No one knew where she'd gone. Some said she was living in Paris under another name. Others said she'd married again. I didn't care to know. Revenge isn't about watching someone fall, it's about freeing yourself from what they made you carry. One afternoon, months later, a letter arrived. No return address. Just my name in neat, unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a short note. "Grace, the estate feels empty without you. I hope the river sings you the peace you deserve. C.W." I smiled as I folded it back into the envelope. The sound of the water outside was soft and steady, like a heartbeat. That evening, I stood by the garden gate, watching the sunset spread across the fields, gold fading into rose, the sky wide and endless. The same world that had once felt so cruel now felt open, forgiving. I thought of all the nights I'd stood in silence, swallowing my words, hiding my pain so no one would see. And I realized something simple but powerful. Sometimes silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the sharpest weapon of all. A few months later, a young maid from the village came to visit me. Her name was Lily, bright eyes, nervous smile, clutching her apron with trembling fingers. "Miss Bennett," she said shyly, "they told me you used to work for the Whitmores. I just started at another big house. The lady there, she's cruel. I don't know how to bear it." I looked at her, at the fear and hope mingled in her eyes, and felt something inside me soften. "Sit down," I said, pouring her tea, "and listen carefully." She did. I told her that kindness isn't weakness. That silence, when used wisely, is strength. That she should learn, observe, and wait, because those who look down on others always forget to look behind them. By the time she left, the sun had set, and the river shimmered in the moonlight. I stood by the window, feeling the cool night air brush against my skin. The world was quiet again. But this time, it was a different kind of quiet, not fear, not invisibility, but peace. I'd been the maid they looked down on. But in the end, I was the one who walked away standing tall.